Hello. In this video, we are going to see how the competence of critical thinking relates to innovation, and at the same time, we're going to identify some typical behavior which takes place when one is engaged in critical thinking. To your left, you have the definition of innovation, where I've highlighted in red those words of the definition that are most associated with critical thinking. In this case, it refers to checking whether our idea or innovation adds value or is useful for something. Because critical thinking involves analyzing issues or problems with a purpose. For example, checking if something has value or checking if something is useful, assessing the advantages and inconveniences, or estimating the risks associated with the process. This capacity is particularly useful in the innovation process, at least in two stages. One is when we are coming to the end of the idea generation stage, and we're going to move on to the implementation stage. At that moment, we have to assess to what extent we have developed the different alternatives that we've created, which of them can be implemented with the resources we have, or which of them have most potential or are most interesting. This is a stage where critical thinking is key. And another stage where it is key is at the result stage, when we are checking whether what we wanted to achieve with this innovation, or the usefulness we wanted to get, has been reached, and is available for all the people, all the receivers of the innovation that we identified at the start. When we employ critical thinking, what we are basically doing is applying logical thinking based on rational arguments. And this rationality is itself based on a linear sequence of step-by-step arguments, where we consider the positive aspects and the negative aspects of the different options that we have before us. Very often, when we do this, we'll follow an analytical process where we break the problem down into much more manageable parts. And as we then have different parts, we have to see how to integrate them, how they relate to each other. That is to say, we have to understand how these different parts or subdivisions we've identified relate and affect each other. To do this, it's important that we build models that enable us to understand these relations, and at the same time to anticipate how the system will react to the possible scenarios that may even change in the future or that we believe could occur. And this is also going to help us to explore different aspects of the problem, as well as the potential of each of the different alternative solutions or options. And many times these different aspects or points of view can be seen by putting ourselves in the shoes of the different actors who are involved in the innovation process, whether these be generators, clients, or recipients of the innovation. And in this process, it is vital that we distinguish between what are facts and what are assumptions. In other words, when engaged in critical thinking, it is important to search for the details that allow us to discover the facts and to analyze them, rather than base our analysis on assumptions or suppositions about what the problem is, and which may have nothing to do with the reality. This aspect is fundamental, as it closes the cycle of these rational arguments. You cannot talk about positive or negative aspects if you do not have the concrete evidence or data that allows you to specify what the facts are. I also want to make clear at this point that it is not always necessary to use critical thinking. In fact, there are moments in the different stages of the innovation process where critical thinking should be parked, or should be at least in the background. For example, during the stages where we are generating ideas, or we want to exploit our creativity, or the creativity of our team. If you're trying to generate ideas and at the same time someone is slapping them down saying that they are not going to work, then this is silly, and we probably won't get many ideas. And the same can happen even when you make positive comments. You may believe that you are helping and encouraging, but when you're in the middle of the creative process, any judgment or remark, positive or negative, can harm the creative process, because it activates other cognitive processes in your brain which prevent or block new ideas. This is rather like what happens with the blank sheet syndrome, which some of you may have experienced. It is not that you have no ideas. What happens is that the ideas emerge, And as they are emerging, you block them because you think that they are not suitable, are not good enough, that the team won't like them. Then any kind of judgment generates a block that prevents creativity. On the other hand, if you are one of those people in who critical thinking is so intense that it prevents you developing or applying competences or skills, you should try to funnel it to be positive, or at least less harmful to the group interaction or the innovation process in which you're involved. For example, if you have to generate ideas and you're a person that cannot avoid critical thinking, and you have to be evaluating things, my suggestion would be to use techniques or alternative ways of generating ideas that do not involve deferred judgment. Or you could use heuristics or exploration of logical sequences or matrices of logical arguments that allow you to take advantage of your talent within the group, even in those phases where you are generating alternatives. You should now be able to relate critical thinking with some of the stages of innovation, specifically with the generation stage, with the transition between the generation stage and the implementation stage, and later at the evaluation of results stage. And we've also mentioned some typical behaviour involved in critical thinking, and become aware that it is not always appropriate to be critical or to apply this capacity when you're working in processes of innovation.